What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Pizza Buffet live here on Forward Progress, part of the Hammer Betting Network, proudly presented by Fanduel. I'm Rob Pizzola. Today, diving into divisional round games. It's the best teams, the biggest stakes. 4 games this weekend, standing between us and the conference championships next week. Now, I do want to say, getting into it, I like to give a little preamble. Good morning to everyone in the chat out there. I see a lot of familiar faces. Dictator Jay, Johnny, Alan, Carlos, Jan, Connor, good morning to everyone out there who has decided to join me here in the early going. I'd like to talk a little bit about the week before I get into it. This week's market has been relatively quiet outside of some weather speculation. Lines are pretty tight. You're going to see that with my numbers relative to where we're at in market right now. Don't worry, I'll still break down each matchup. I'm going to share my thoughts on key betting angles. I'll highlight props that stand out to me as well. But for the millionth time in doing these streams, probably don't want to be getting down on these games leading up till kickoff. It's late in the year now. You can apply this to next year as well. But the reality is, going to bet into a pretty efficient market at this point. That's not to say you can't win betting the NFL this weekend, but in the long run, probably not a great idea. If you're just here to have some fun, like I said, I'll break down the matchups. You do with that whatever you want, and we can go from there. As always, I do love hearing from you. Feel free to drop your questions, your leans, any insights that you have. Drop them into the chat. Your participation, makes this show what it is. I do enjoy that every single morning. Before we jump in, don't forget to like, subscribe, share this video out if you can. Our first game is at 4:30 Eastern time today. Plenty of time before kickoff. If you do enjoy the insights on here, share this out on your social networks. Your support helps us grow. It ensures as well that we can keep doing this in the years going forward. So we'll do divisional round in a weekend. I'm a little bit participated in a bowling event last night. Friendly bowling event. Not going to lie, lower back in shambles this morning. Suffering already in the seat. But what are you going to do? The Rolling Stoners came out ahead last night. That's all that matters. Big bowling event. Got the job done. Pizza man, rolling the rock to a team win. All right. Let's get into the divisional round. Starting with our early game today. Houston and Kansas City. As mentioned, not a ton of market movement across the board this week. Taking a look at Houston KC, most of the books are sitting at 9 right now. FanDuel's a juiced 8.5. Total in the game did come down here from open to 41.5. And you'll see I'm pretty close to being right on market in this game. First and foremost, let's talk about weather. It's going to be a theme in some of these games this week. This is going to be a very low game time temperature, low to mid 20s. You got 10-mile-an-hour winds, some gusts over 20 miles an hour. Not crazy in terms of a bad weather game, but really cold tends to bring down scoring a little bit. Windy tends to bring down scoring a little bit. We're kind of on the threshold of both of those. I don't think it'll be a major impact, at least not to Kansas City, who's more accustomed to this. Might be more of an impact to Houston. On the injury side, we got a few injuries for the Texans. Joe Mixon, he went limited and then DNP on Friday with an ankle injury. Could talk about that from a live betting perspective. But I think Joe Mixon will play in the game, even though he was DNP Friday. However, clearly not 100%. Robert Woods did not practice this week. 3 times DNP with a hip injury. I only mention that because Houston is obviously suffering from wide receiver injuries with Diggs and Tank Dell on IR. They could use anybody that they can get. His status is in doubt. Azeez Al-Shaair dealing with a knee injury in the linebacking core. He missed the first game between these two teams. He went 2 limited practices, Thursday, Friday. Actually opposite that, Wednesday, Thursday, because it's a day in advance. And probably going to play in this, but you want to keep an eye on him. On the KC side, Jalen Watson, their number 2 corner, has been activated off IR. He got 3 full practices in. I don't know what his workload will be like in this game, but seems very likely like he's trending towards playing and being active in this game. This game has, I think, more injury information than anything else out there, and it's a quiet week in terms of injuries as well. Now, I mentioned that aforementioned game. That was week 16. A lot of people have been talking about what the line was in that game and comparing it to this week and trying to justify how you can go from that price to this price. I don't like the transitive property when it comes to sports betting. I understand using it as a starting point, but I just purely make a number on a game based off of a matchup, and I go from there. And there's a lot of stuff to factor into the equation here that I don't think people are necessarily quantifying properly. For example, having 2 consecutive weeks of full rest. Some people might say, well, that's going to lead to rust. And it can. But surely when you have a quarterback that was dealing with an ankle injury, who happens to be the most prolific quarterback that we've seen in the playoffs in the modern era, that's going to help. So there's a lot going on here. In that game, there was no Hollywood Brown for the Kansas City Chiefs, who I think adds a different dynamic to the offense. Tank Dell got injured. There was offensive line injuries for Houston. Houston defense was missing a couple players. Like I said, Azeez Al-Shaair was suspended. Folo Fudukasi on the defensive line was out as well, and he was an impactful player for Houston last week. So there's a lot that's happening outside of just, well, this was the line in week 16, and here we are now, and it's got pushed too far. Let's start with the Houston offense in this game. The offensive line is in better shape now than it was in week 16 because Juice Scruggs was not playing for the Houston Texans in that game. And they had some injuries in game as well, which impacted their ability to block the Kansas City defensive front. Now, the offensive line is healthier going into this week's game. However, they're still not a very good O-line. They've struggled all year. Even their best offensive lineman, Laramie Tunsil, has been dealing with penalty issues all year long. So I'm looking for paths to success for the Texans offense. And I'm really struggling to see them. You look at in the running game, probably not going to get a whole lot. KC is very good at defending the run. They have been all year long. You look at in the passing game, well, you have a below average offensive line, a Kansas City team that has the 7th best pressure rate in the league this year, 31.4%. Rested, couple weeks off. KC's going to play a lot of man, especially if Jalen Watson is back. It's going to be a struggle for Houston to get anything downfield in this game. First matchup, rewatched it this week. In the early going, Houston did find some success moving the ball downfield, a lot of intermediate in-breaking routes. And I mean, I don't necessarily think that is viable going forwards because KC has defended that really well this year. So I'm not really loving the matchup on the Houston side. I think if Houston wants to advance and be competitive in this game, I think it comes down to their defense having another big performance or Kansas City's offense just continuing to struggle as they have for a large majority this year. Now, there is a matchup advantage on the other side, and that's certainly Houston's defensive ends against Kansas City's tackles. KC just hasn't had the O-line this year, especially at tackle. And that's been a big issue. I think you will likely see KC try to combat that by getting the ball out of Mahomes' hands very quickly in this game. I mean, they do that a lot. They don't tend to run a lot of receivers downfield. It's more of what I like to call a dink and dunk offense, and they do it with precision. Very high success rate. When they do get to third down, Mahomes converts third down so much higher than any other quarterback in the league. They just find a way to do that. They're not going to give you explosives, but they will give you a high success rate. And this is Chiefs offense, extra time to prepare for this matchup. I'm not going to cite Andy Reid off the buy stats because that's like market's kind of caught up to that and it's priced in at this point. But there's often this joke about what are the Chiefs going to use their good plays today? And I think there's something to that as well. In addition to the way that things have run for them lately, they're not turning the ball over offensively. It's been 7 straight games since they've had a turnover. Now, some might say, well, there's some regression due. For me, it's kind of repeatable when everything is underneath. So I think this is a fair market price. If you ask me to pick, I would honestly take KC on the spread. I'm more interested in KC than I am in Houston at this particular number right now. But what do you know, there's to me, there's not a ton to do here. I see a lot of stuff in the chat here. John Weedman says KC's rest is greater than potential rust. Veteran team. I would tend to agree. I also wouldn't get carried away too early if KC has maybe a bad series or two. TC says Texans going to have to play through Dalton Schultz. Yes, but I mean, I'll get to the the props in this game in a second. Yes, but I think Schultz is even priced too high here. Lots of people talking about Xavier Worthy, TC again. Rush yards over 3.5, 25 plus rush yards plus 800. You know how I feel about wide receiver runs in the playoffs. I do think that they do that a lot more. John Smith says, do you foresee a lot of 2 tight end sets for KC? I do see at least some. Noah Gray's a guy that I have my eye on when it comes to props as well. Considering KC has had a tough time covering spreads, sounds like Texans team total under makes more sense. Possibly. I mean, KC has had a tough time covering spreads this year because their offense has not been as dynamic as years past. But now with Hollywood Brown in the mix, the first time we saw him back, they moved the ball with ease against the Steelers defense. Now, Steelers defense a little bit overrated, as we've seen, but it adds an extra dynamic. Like having Worthy, Brown, Hopkins on the field at one time, being able to roll out Kelsey and Gray as well. I think there's a lot going in their favor. So I wouldn't be so hung up on the KC ATS numbers from this year because I think adding a playmaker like Brown fundamentally changes the offense for them. Okay. From a props perspective, let me get my words together here. I'm doing, if you convert all of these skill position players on the Houston Texans, like their yardage numbers, you convert the odds to like a standardized yardage number. There's like a lot of yardage that is baked into this market right now or expected for the Texans offense that I'm just not seeing personally. Like we look at where some of these guys are priced across the board. Collins at 83.5 receiving yards. We got it up on screen right now. That's a lot of yardage. And I'm sure there's an expectation that they're trailing in the game, but this is not a dynamic offense altogether. So for me, if I'm attacking anything Houston related, it's mostly unders on the offensive side of the ball. I do think Dalton Schultz is too high. You can find some 38.5 out there. He's the one that stands out to me as being a little bit too high. 83.5 for Collins. That's pretty high when you consider the fact that the Chiefs are not giving up many explosives either. You might want to go and play Robert Woods under as well. 2.5 receptions, minus 152 at Fanduel. Just in case he ends up playing. Did it come off the board here, Jason? Just taking a look quickly. Looks like it's off the board. Well, that idea is done for. If you do see Robert Woods listed, which he was about half an hour ago, some unders there, 3 times DNP, hip injury, that sounds like has re-aggravation written all over it as well. So this is, I mean, if I'm going to look for anything Houston related on the over, it's maybe Joe Mixon attempts. Other than that, I think that their numbers are high. Xavier Hutchinson would be the other guy, but a lot of the value's been beat out of that already as well. On the KC side, I got a few things. I mean, Noah Gray, 11 and a half, 12 and a half receiving yards across the board. I think that's a little bit too low for this particular game. Think he'll be involved in some 2 tight end stuff. I like that look. In addition, I'm not convinced the Chiefs are going to run this ball in this game as much as people think they're going to run the ball in this game. I think it's going to be a lot of short passing, more so than running. I don't know how it's going to break down between Pacheco and Hunt. I think Pacheco's kind of been getting ramped up for this game, but Kareem Hunt rush attempts is 9.5 right now. Pretty heavily juiced towards the under, I got to say. That matters. But 8.5 plus 108 on the under Fanduel. Either one of those is fine. If you want to avoid the juice, I think that's a good option. So that's kind of where I'm going with this game in terms of props. I see some comments about Stroud rushing, Mahomes rushing. Honestly, I think both those numbers are fine. Remember, too, Mahomes with the kneel downs, if that's going to happen, he's not like a 1 yard kneel it down type of guy either. That comes into effect and has come into play many times before. John Warner asked, Noah Gray, anytime touchdown thoughts. Okay, let's take a look at anytime touchdown for this game in particular. And I'll go through this for every single game. Again, FanDuel, our sponsor. If you're not betting anytime touchdown, like if you don't have a FanDuel account to bet anytime touchdowns, I think you're an insane person. It's a really high hold market. Gotta go to FanDuel for anytime touchdown. And like just looking at all the main guys here, if we go to the top of the board, like if you're someone who wants to bet the top of the board, Mixon 140, best price in market is FanDuel. Pacheco 160, best price in market. Kelsey 160, best price in market. Hunt, best price in market. Collins, best price. They have best price in market right at the top of the leaderboard. So you got to look to that. Personally, I think the best bet on the board here is DeAndre Hopkins plus 310 for the Kansas City Chiefs anytime touchdown. I like to steer away from the top of the leaderboard as much as possible. Hopkins 310 is a big time standout to me, especially as a good red zone option. Can win one-on-one. Also don't hate Patrick Mahomes plus 550 anytime touchdown either. Those would be the two guys that stand out to me. There's no one on the Texans that stands out to me. And again, that is just because I don't like their chances for success, especially getting it into the end zone. One thing of note, actually, I should say, maybe worth a look here. So Joe Mixon ended up going DNP Friday. He's going to come in pretty banged up. You have two backups there in Dameon Pierce and Dare Ogunbowale. Now, Pierce was 31-1 this morning, and he got bet down pretty heavily to 15-1 range, 14-1. Ogunbowale is still 30-1 at FanDuel. And if I go across the screen, I mean, he's not higher than 18-1 anywhere else. I think that's a decent look. Long shot, flyer, Dare Ogunbowale. And especially since he's kind of like the pass catching guy. If stuff gets really out of hand and Mixon he's not good to go on that ankle, then this is more live than it's 30-1. I would take a shot. Thoughts on CJ Stroud over passing yards? Honestly, I was leaning slightly towards the under there. I think FanDuel had best price at 227.5 earlier. It's got bet down 220. They're moving in on game day in real time. No opinion, honestly. No opinion there. Okay, that's our first breakdown. We'll get to more in a second. We do have 4 great games this NFL weekend for the divisional round of the playoffs. There's no better place to bet on the games than Fanduel, America's #1 sportsbook. I'm a big fan of Fanduel personally. I think they do it right. They got a great product. They cater to recreational bettors and sharper bettors. They offer good prop markets. Anytime touchdown prices are amazing. In-game markets are amazing. And right now, all customers can pump up their gridiron winnings with different promotions, like a no-sweat SGP and a live profit boost token on this weekend's games. No sweat SGP, live profit boost token on this weekend's games. It's tons of ways you can get in on the NFL action. You can bet money lines, spreads, player props, and more. Plus, with super simple live betting, lightning fast bet settlement, and instant withdrawals, FanDuel makes betting on the NFL easier than ever before. Just visit fanduel.com/forwardprogress to download FanDuel today. You must be 21 plus and present in select states or 18 plus and present in DC. Opt-in is required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable profit boost tokens. Restrictions apply, including token expiration. See terms for offers at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org, or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Rec Player says no FanDuel in Florida. Unfortunately not, but there will be at some point when regulated gaming is streamlined state by state. Okay, our night game today, which I will be on air for, is the Commanders and the Lions. Similarly, not seeing a ton of market movement this week on this game. From a numbers perspective, my biggest quote-unquote lean of the week would be to the Washington Commanders, although that's a very minor lean. You know, you're looking at 9s or 9.5s in market, 8.5 FanDuel. I would never, ever play that if this was a regular season game at that discrepancy of a number. Total is extremely high at 55.5. I guess I'm slightly lean towards the under, but that's just not a position that I'm going to be taking this morning here. Okay. Few injury notes. On the offensive line, Detroit's going to be without their right guard, Kevin Zeitler. He's got a hamstring injury, will not play today. So it's not the fully healthy offensive line, still very solid. As long as the tackles, center are there, they're going to be fine. On defense, we know Detroit's had a ton of players on IR. Patrick O'Connor, defensive lineman, is inactive or will be with a calf injury. Just another depth defensive lineman that Detroit's losing. They do possibly get Ennis Rakestraw back at corner, though. Coming off IR with a hamstring injury, got a limited practice in on Friday. So that could be an upgrade to their secondary, getting another body back there. Washington, pretty healthy in this matchup. Now, I'll start with the Washington offense. I think this is a pretty obvious, like, what needs to happen, recipe for success type of game here. One, Washington's receivers need to win against man coverage because Detroit plays a lot. Two, Jaden Daniels has to kill them with his legs. Even with all these defensive line injuries for Detroit, they've been very good at stopping the run. DJ Reader, who they brought over from Cincinnati, is such an elite run defender. It almost doesn't matter what's around him at some points. You run up the middle, they're going to stop it. Linebacking core is held up on the outside. So that's going to be fine. Now, Detroit does play a ton of man coverage. And this is going to be a game where Terry McLaurin has to win. But also, when things break down, Jaden Daniels has to use his legs. This is a turf game against a man D. You're going to have their, you might see a spy for Detroit. I don't know that you can necessarily spy Jaden Daniels. It's like the teams who try to spy Lamar or Josh Allen, and it doesn't matter. So they have that working in their favor. And if you look at the Lions under Aaron Glenn, they've never really been good at defending mobile quarterbacks. It's been a consistent weakness for them. year after year. Now, it's a little bit misleading because some of these quarterbacks do put up rushing yardage in garbage time. But even if we strip out garbage time, it's been a pretty bad defense against mobile quarterbacks. Look at Washington this year, going through the schedule. They haven't had a lot of games where they've played opposing defenses that play a ton of man coverage. The most common, or the team that played the most against them, was the Cleveland Browns. That game, 11 carries for Daniels, 82 yards. Washington's offense put up 34 points. Pretty successful overall. It's going to be a very tough environment for a rookie quarterback. So far, Daniels has exhibited characteristics that he's not just an average rookie quarterback. I'm as confident in him as I would be in some veterans going into Detroit. Now, ultimately, this year has been pretty consistent for Washington outside of Daniels' injury. When he's been healthy, offense moves. Typically. They did get a little bit lucky against the Bucs last week with some fumble-related issues, some self-inflicted wounds by Tampa Bay. But ultimately, I don't mind this matchup for the Washington offense. The problem is that I don't know what their defense is going to do in this game. I will say I was very surprised by the Commanders' ability to stop the Bucs running game last week. I'll be the first to say I didn't see that coming. Washington's been a pretty horrendous run defense the entire year. They got Jonathan Allen back, seemed to make a big difference for them in that game. This is a different beast, though, altogether. This is the Lions running game. David Montgomery back into the mix, which honestly might actually hurt them a little bit. Extra time to prepare. I don't really see a big path for Washington getting stops. And everyone knows that. Total in the game's 55.5. But even, let's say Washington is able to stop the run in some capacity, I don't know that they can stop this passing game. Detroit's offense scores. They score when they're at home. When they play bad defenses, they score even more. When you look at, from an EPA perspective this year, the worst defenses that they've played, the Titans, the 49ers, Cowboys, the Jags, they put up at least 40 in every single one of those games. They know how to beat bad defenses. Washington also plays a ton of man coverage. That is a recipe for disaster against Ben Johnson. They find ways to scheme guys open against man coverage. They know exactly how to play it. You will see lots of times this game where guys are just wide open for the Lions. And that's been the case all year. Goff has killed man coverage. I don't see the Commanders as a team that's going to switch that up. And also, Marshawn Lattimore back. I mean, he did not look great last week either in this particular matchup. So, really tough for me. I do think Washington has to have like a 99th, maybe 95th level of percentile, I'd say, of offense to win this game or to keep it close. It is a lot of points, though, for the Lions, in what I would maintain is not a great defense. We could look at the Darnold game, sure. Put a lot of pressure on him. I mean, that's very short-sighted. In recent weeks, against good offenses, teams that can move the ball through the air, 49ers put up a ton of offensive yardage. The Bills just destroyed this Lions defense with a dual threat quarterback. Interesting game. I can see a variety of outcomes. My first thought when these two teams matched up was Detroit's going to score a lot of points. I still think that they will. But as I've gotten into it more, I am more optimistic about the Washington offense than I thought I would be going into this particular game. I see a lot of commentary about the Commanders team total over. I think a lot of people are choosing to play it that way. XS is playing it in the first half. I don't hate the look. I mean, it's really priced as a derivative of the full game spread and total right now. So it's not like you're getting supreme value in that altogether. I don't hate the look, though. I think there's lots of scenarios where they do get there. The biggest issue for getting with this total and getting to this number is you have two teams, and Judah talked about this on the best bet show we did this week, although there were no actual best bets. But we talked about it this week. You're going to have a lot of variance in the fourth downs for both of these teams, right? Detroit's always aggressive. They go for it on their own side of the field. Washington last week, 6 fourth down attempts, 4 conversions. There's a lot going on there in terms of variance. From a props perspective, Detroit, Washington. Okay, few things here on the Detroit side. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is priced a little bit too high in rushing yardage. I know Washington has a really bad rush D. Montgomery is being priced as if he's going to get like roughly 30% of the carries in this game. I'm not, other than him coming back off of an injury, if we look at the precedent from this year, I think there's too big of a gap between these running backs, but I'd rather play Gibbs under than Montgomery over. That would be my preference. Again, you want to shop around as much as possible. We have 81.5 at FanDuel, but there's 86.5 out there right now. That one is one I like. Amon-Ra St. Brown, mid-70s receiving yards. I'm going over there. I think this is like the quintessential matchup for St. Brown to have a huge dominant game against a lot of man coverage. It's a coverage he can beat, and it's especially when you beat man as well, huge yak as well, yards after catch. So that on the Detroit side is stuff that I'm looking at. On the Washington side, I don't really like a whole lot here. I did bet some. I got burned on Brian Robinson under receptions last week. I'm going back to the well on that again, under 1.5 receptions. That's kind of just been a look of mine. Generally, I do think Eckler will be more involved in the passing game than Brian Robinson. So I'll play that under -122 FanDuel, -115 at some other spots. Aside from that, not a ton that I love here on the Washington side. Leans to Jaden Daniels passing over. Lean ever so slightly to Zach Ertz over on receiving yards. But that's it. All right. Touchdowns for this game. I talked about De'Ami Brown on Thursday's show, and I still do quite like that. Plus 360 range. I do think that's the way to go for this game. I'm not as high. I see a lot of people in the chat that are high on De'Ami Brown, just like his regular yardage stuff. I disagree with that. I think he's kind of getting overpriced now off of one big game. There's been at least a market adjustment. But in the touchdown market, I think he's very live. Plus 360, solid, in my opinion. Sick Boy says, why market move against you? It's a good question. And I don't have the answer to that because there's not really been any changes in the offensive structure for the Commanders over the course of the week. I think there's a general viewpoint. I wouldn't be surprised if Brown receptions and receiving yards got steamed under later today. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened because there has been a week over week adjustment. But again, for a red zone target, I like the matchup. All right. Sunday games. Our early game tomorrow. is the Rams and the Eagles. This one has seen some movement. The Eagles are out to 6.5-point favorites in some spots. The total was bet down a bit, and then looks like it's catching a little bit of over money and coming back up towards the over. This has the biggest weather impact of the weekend, or at least the one that people are focusing on the most. It does look, as of now, that it's going to be a snow game in Philly. We don't know the extent of the snow yet, but very likely seeing in-game snow. Not a lot of wind. Pretty low, actually, 5 to 10 miles an hour sustained. And typically, conditions like this aren't actually conducive to the unders. It's actually more conducive to an over. There's been a lot of stuff put out there over the years on this particular type of situation, but typically it's because of a couple things. One, pass rushers struggle a little bit more when there's snow on the ground. It's easier for the O-lines to hold up on both teams. Second, it's easier for wide receivers in that they know what route they're running, whereas the corners just don't have the footing. Also depends on the field conditions. There's a lot that goes into it, but lots of money towards the under because of the weather, maybe because of the matchup as well. I don't necessarily agree with that. It's a bad situation for the Rams. They're a disadvantage on rest. I don't think the weather works in their favor, especially not the cold, being a dome team. Also, we have some injuries on the Rams side. Now, Sean McVay said all three of these players are going to play, which is kind of dumb that they've listed them all as questionable, because questionable would indicate that it's a toss-up. But McVay says they're all going to play. Left tackle, Alaric Jackson, dealing with separate injuries, knee and chest. Didn't practice on Friday after he practiced in full on Thursday. Nose tackle, Bobby Brown, has a shoulder injury. He did not practice. 3 practices this week. He did not see the field. Usually a very bad sign, especially for one of the most crucial positions in defending the Eagles defense. And then cornerback Ahkello Weatherspoon left last week's game against the Vikings. DNP, limited practice. He's got a quad injury as well. Those are very impactful injuries. I would really monitor those in real time, because especially the top two, left tackle, nose tackle, either of those guys leaves the game early, that is going to be an extreme challenge for the Rams. The Rams had a very good offensive game plan last week against the Vikings. They kind of knew what to expect, and they game planned for it. Flores sent the house. He blitzed a lot. Stafford typically kills the blitz, and he did. This is going to be a very different matchup. Philly does not blitz a lot, less than 20%. They rush 4 a lot more, and they have way better corners. They can play coverage way better than the Vikings can. I don't see this as being a very good matchup for the Rams offense. They have one wide receiver that can win on the outside right now. That's Puka Nacua. The Eagles are pretty much going to shut down every other option because they can't beat, the Rams receivers can't beat these Eagle corners. It's very one-dimensional for the Rams wide receiver group right now. We did see the Rams play more 2 tight end sets last week. Might see that a little bit more if they try to establish the run on the Eagles defense, which might be a route that they try to go. I could see McVay getting ultra conservative on the road early in this game and trying to play a field position type of game. I've seen that story play out many times before. That's certainly possible. I just don't think that that's going to be ultra successful. At the end of the day, Stafford is going to have a big game. Because when you think about what Stafford is really good at, blitz, facing the blitz, which he's not going to see here, getting a lot of zone coverage where the Eagles mix it up a lot more. I don't see it. Add in the fact that this is an outdoor game. They're not accustomed to playing in these types of games. It's a little bit more of a performance downgrade for the Rams offense as well. So I'm not big on the Rams offensive performance. On the other side, Eagles offense has already had a highly successful game against the Rams. And I think that there's a chance for that to happen again for a few reasons. For one, the Eagles did not have Devontae Smith in that game. It was actually a really weird game because there was only 7 catches by Eagles wide receivers. 6 were from A.J. Brown. But you wouldn't know it because the Eagles basically ran the ball right down the Rams' throats. And the challenge when you go back and watch that game is it's not like the Rams didn't try to stop this. The Rams were playing stacked boxes pretty much the entire game, and they still couldn't stop this. They knew Devontae Smith was out. It's just A.J. Brown on the outside. Let's shut down the running game, and they couldn't do it. And that is extremely concerning. They haven't been a good run defense all year. You have a nose tackle who hasn't practiced all week long. It's a very young front for the Rams. I think the Eagles will be able to run the ball successfully in this game. But let's say this works out for LA. They're able to stop the run. Well, the one thing that the Rams pass defense really struggles at or in coverage is on the outside. They're fine over the middle of the field, but outside receivers have had a field day against this defense this year. If the Rams are devoted to stopping the run, there's going to be a lot of single high looks for Jalen Hurts. Basically can pick the side of the field he wants, A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith one-on-one. All right. Hector says, everyone knows the matchup isn't great for the Rams, so why isn't it pushing 7? Well, I mean, it is priced like it's a great matchup for Philly. It is priced that way. I think to like a casual fan, they look at the gap between these two teams and they don't see it as being that high. So it's been pushed out to this price. The Eagles have been getting bet. 7 would be a very clear resistance point. I don't think it can get to 7 without the Rams taking some money at that point. Now you need the Eagles to win by 8. So yeah, I don't really get that. I mean, it has been getting pushed out that way. Okay. Prop side for this game. I haven't done as much work on props for tomorrow's game as I have for today's. One reason why is sometimes I don't want to bet props super early because of like too much CLV can sometimes not be a good thing in certain situations. So I'm not super in tune with tomorrow's games relative to today's. First thing I would say is that because of the perceived advantage for the Eagles and the Rams likely in trailing game state, Kyren Williams rush attempts at FanDuel is 19.5 right now. The under would be best price in market. And I would like to go towards Kyren Williams under at that price. I think that's a fairly decent one. Someone was asking about Stafford rush yards over here earlier. I saw it. I didn't make a note of it, but it was someone did bring it up. There it is, Sammy. Run it back with Stafford over half rush yards. Plus 114 is a very good number, relatively speaking. I just don't know that I want. Of all the QBs, we're talking about a 36-year-old guy, short week, bad footing, outdoor. I don't know that I really like it this week, to be completely honest. Touchdown market for this game. I'm almost never tempted by this, but Jalen Hurts at Fanduel is minus 105. And I think that's a bettable number. 105. I almost never go to the top of the board. But the tush push is so successful for them, and they just run it over and over and over. It's not like they abandon it if it gets stopped one time. I do like that for a look. Deeper down the board, if I was going to target someone on the Rams, I would probably go with the idea of they're continuing to play some 2 tight end sets. Higbee got hurt last week, but he's going to be playing. Davis Allen is 21-1. Hunter Long is 41-1. Those are guys that I would target for long shots if you're looking for them. Like Tutu Atwell is in the same price range, and I think Davis Allen is way more likely to score a touchdown than Tutu Atwell, personally. So that's where I would look on the Rams side. But again, just don't love the matchup, especially as the week has gone on with those weather conditions. I think that's going to favor Philadelphia quite a bit. By the way, I don't want to make it sound like I have like a lot of conviction in the Eagles. Like you guys see my numbers on the game, they're going up. I think the market is fine. It's pricing in the matchup at this point. It's just really hard for me to delineate that or get that out of my head. All right, our final game, Baltimore-Buffalo. Again, there will be a live watch-along for this game tomorrow night. I'm really looking forward to this one and hope we get the game that we deserve between the Ravens and Bills. Money has moved towards Baltimore this week. Buffalo opened as a favorite quickly. Baltimore did end up getting bet. Some spots have moved out to 1.5 Baltimore now. I make Baltimore a very, very small favorite in the game. I don't think there's a ton to do here either, but I guess slightly in Buffalo. This is going to be a friggin' cold game. I'm in Toronto. We often get similar weather patterns to Buffalo. We had a pretty mild day yesterday. Going to be somewhat mild today, and then temperatures are going to plummet overnight. And this is going to be cold. Temperatures in the low teens. That is enough to have an impact on the game. Cold enough where you want to die, basically. Might see some snow, but for the most part, just brutally, brutally cold game. Zay Flowers listed as doubtful. I will be floored if Zay Flowers plays with that knee injury. I think he is not going to play. That's how I end up with this number on Buffalo. I'll explain in a second. For the Bills side, Ray Davis dealing with that concussion. Did practice 3 times. I'm not sure he's gotten cleared yet. That's one to keep an eye on from a props perspective. Obviously, Ty Johnson would be the guy that would get some uptick if Ray Davis is ruled out in the game. This is another game where I think people have been looking at a few games this weekend talking about how good the matchup is for one side versus the other, right? So Eagles-Rams is, which I just talked about, is one. And I think this is the other, where when you think of the Bills and what they like to do on defense, they like to play light defenses. This has been the staple under Sean McDermott, right? They will let you run the ball all the way down to the field. Their red zone defense has been good for many years. They force stalled drives. It's like a bend but don't break. That's how they play things. Don't give up the big explosive play. Light box. The Ravens would destroy that. You cannot play light box against the Ravens. Now, the first time these teams played earlier in the year, they didn't play that many light boxes. They got a lot of guys down low. Now, granted, they were missing players in the game, and that's been talked about. But they didn't play light boxes, and they still got trampled in that game. So I don't, you got to think probabilistically. There's always probabilities of certain things happening. The probability of Buffalo's run D holding up is low unless they really just commit everyone to it. And that's the difference between Zay Flowers playing and not playing. Because if Zay Flowers was playing this week and Buffalo is jamming bodies to stop the run, Zay Flowers is going to win downfield. He's a very dynamic receiver. He's their big play threat for the Baltimore offense. He's a true explosive weapon. Without him, the wide receiving core looks a lot worse. We noticed that last week when they started to go to tight end a lot with Andrews and Likely. Makes a lot of sense. That's probably the way Baltimore's playing this game. Lots of heavy looks up front, to tight end, run the ball as much as possible. And yes, Matt Milano was missing in the first game. Terrell Bernard, Von Miller, Teron Johnson. There were certainly defensive injuries, but even at full health, it's still probably a viable way for Baltimore to move the ball. And Baltimore's not going out of the playoffs passing the ball 50 times like they did against the Chiefs last year. They had to hear about that the entire offseason. They're going to stick with their bread and butter and force Buffalo to try to stop it. Now, one thing I will say is I do a lot of looks in the offseason in regards to, theories I have, and then I start to research them. And a few years ago, one of the theories was when two teams are evenly matched and one team blows the other out of the water. So I was looking at specifically games where the spread was like 3 points or less. I can't remember the exact dynamics of what I was looking up. And one team just blows out the other and they play again down the road. Is there a shift in dynamic? And oftentimes you do see that the team that gets blown out plays way above expectations in the second game. And here's the rationale as to why I think that's possible for Buffalo. The reason is the team that blows the other team out tends to stick with the entire game plan from earlier, which is, this worked for us. We're going to do it again. And the other team now is able to scheme for that a little bit better. They kind of know what's coming. Whereas it forces the team that got blown out to deviate and do something a little bit different. So there could be something there. I just want to point it out. I'm bringing it up. It's a way I think about betting and always looking for little edges here and there. But Buffalo knows what's coming. I'm not necessarily sure that Baltimore does. Now, with that said, the Bills like to use heavy sets. Suma talks about this a lot. They use a sixth offensive lineman a lot. They did that against Denver last week. And they like to run the ball out of those. Baltimore is much more equipped to stop that than Denver is. Baltimore's got big defensive linemen. They've been very good against the run all year. My thought is that the Bills are going to be way more pass heavy than people think. And I really think they're going to try to attack the Ravens using their screen game, a lot of short passes, basically a lot of underneath stuff. That first game that these guys played this year, Josh Allen had a 28% success rate. That's his lowest success rate in 5 years. TA went back and looked at all those. It's the only negative EPA game he had this year. It's his worst EPA game since 2021. It was very much an outlier performance. Amazing defensive game plan there. Baltimore played a ton of coverage. They still got a lot of pressure by playing coverage. Because it was such a good game, the Ravens probably go right back to that game plan, and Buffalo is probably preparing this week to attack that specific game plan and not be caught off guard by it. I also just generally like the idea of Josh Allen at home, game on the line, close game. Tough handicap, honestly. It really is. Flipping a coin with my numbers. Hope it's a really interesting game. Props wise for Baltimore and Buffalo, I talked Derrick Henry. I want to see what the number is at now. I played him over on receptions earlier this week in the 180s. I think that one's moved a bit now. Yeah. Still a decent look, in my opinion, on Derrick Henry receptions over. They've been utilizing him a lot more in the passing game recently. And without Flowers in the mix as well, I think you see more screens out of the Ravens. I'm somewhat interested in Khalil Shakir's longest reception over 18.5. And not necessarily because I think he's going to be running downfield a lot, but I think he's going to be actively involved in screen game. Like I said, a lot of underneath stuff. And he's a very good yak guy. That's one look that I particularly like in this game as well. Again, pretty early for me. I'm going to start betting, unless it's a big edge. I'm holding off at this point because I don't want the absurd CLV stuff in my accounts. But those are some early looks there. From a touchdown perspective, just looking at where a lot of these guys are priced in market. This is a tough game from a touchdown perspective because so many players are, Derrick Henry minus 220. I'm not going near that, even though it's quite likely. Don't even think I want to take Cook at 100, even though that's a pretty decent number. Probably the guy who would stand out most for me on the Baltimore side would be Nelson Agholor at 10-1. I don't think there's going to be a ton of opportunity for Agholor. It would just be a numbers play at 10-1. Hitman had mentioned Patrick Ricard being on the field a lot. I bet Patrick Ricard to score a touchdown. I don't even know if it was last week. I don't remember which week it was. It was recent, but it was extreme pain because he caught a ball and then got taken out at the 1 yard line. I think 30-1 is a pretty generous price on Ricard. On the Bills side, I don't see too many players that are mispriced, in all honesty. It's pretty top heavy when it comes to Bills touchdown scores, Cook and Allen, I would say, in the running game. I don't like Amari at 5-1. Dawson Knox 550 is not terrible, but it's not great either. Don't love that. What does the edge-o-meter say? It says not many edges. Not many edges to be found this week. All right. Some more questions. I'll stick around here for a few minutes. Justin says, I'm curious as to why you didn't bring up Worthy rush yards after talking about Mims Puka last week. Thanks, Rob. Worthy is more involved in the rushing game generally. It's like on a week-to-week basis. I was looking for guys that are less involved. Guys that you would think would get a carry, but previous weeks, we're looking at guys that are like over a half rushing yard, 1.5 rushing yards, hoping that they just get that one carry. Xavier Worthy is priced at 4.5, juice towards the over. It's not apples to apples, is why. Keaton Mitchell, 28-1. Indifferent. Joey Sanchez says, what's your biggest play of the weekend? So I'm going to be very honest. I should have just led with this off the top, although I kind of did talk about this off the top. I did not bet a side or total this weekend. I'm going into these games with 0 bets on side or total. Now I have a lot of props, not a lot, a usual amount I'll be rooting for. For me, I'm looking for in-game positions this week where I can really load up. Yeah, I guess. So Carlos says Jamison Williams rush yards. That would be more of a an idea I would be looking for. Do you think Keon Coleman gets more involved this week? Really tough to understand what the Bills are doing on a week-to-week basis with their receivers. McDermott hasn't really said much this week in regards to their receivers. So I actually don't know. I'm struggling to price what I think is going to happen with that receiving group. Early Bird says he got a nice under on Eagles Rams. That was a good one. And he did call it out in the Monday watch along. It's just another reason to be in these watch alongs. It's not only me giving out bets. Some of the nails know exactly what they're doing. What do you think about Chiefs, Lions, Eagles money line parlay? I would not play that personally. I mean, I'm not saying you can't win. I don't think you're going to get a plus EV betting on those. Cooper Kupp unders. I mean, at this point, it's tough. Good point, Hector. Mark Andrews over half rush yards. They do like his. You know what? That's actually not a bad look. I don't know if that's listed. I didn't even look at it yet this week. Mark Andrews. Let's take a quick look. Nothing up. I'm just going to check elsewhere just in case it's up there because I actually do think that's a decent. There are some Mark Andrews rush yards out there, but it's there's only a few shops. I actually like that look, honestly. I do. They're utilizing him under center in short yardage. That's been a trend that they've moved towards. Good call. I like that. Baddest Planet. I've got a decent sized ticket on De'Ami Brown over 30.5 minus 115. Should I get off it, try it, and middle, or let it ride? So listen, there's actual math that you can use when determining whether or not you should hedge a bet or not, or look for a middle. I don't want to get into all of that right now. I'm going to speak in terms of generalities. It really depends on what you make De'Ami Brown in the game and whether or not you think betting under at his current yardage numbers is going to be a valuable position as well. So if you got over 30.5, I mean, it depends on where you're betting it now, but most spots are let's say 36.5 because you're paying big for a second time. So if you think that there's value and his true number lies somewhere in between there, then it might be worth it to look for that type of middle. It might be worth it to look for that type of middle. All right. Johnny C says, man, I love betting. I love betting too. Thank you to all of you who tuned in today. Brandon says, corner released De'Ami over 33.5. Tan guy, but honestly, his props. I left Sean Kerner, I believe is how it's pronounced. I'm a big fan of Sean Kerner. I'm not anti-Action Network people, by the way. I know it might look that way because there's certain people I take shots at. I'm anti-impersonators in the space. I don't like people lying about who they are and what. Kerner is great, in my opinion. I think he's very knowledgeable. And I mean, if you ask me, would you blindly tail Sean Kerner's bets? I probably would, to be completely honest. All right. That's it for me. I'm back here tonight. The plan is to go live about 15 minutes before the start of the Commanders game. So that's scheduled right now for 8 p.m. Eastern time. It's really going to depend on when Houston KC wraps up. If that goes late, then they'll probably push back the Detroit start time just a little bit. But we're scheduled for 7:45 tonight. I'll come on air. I'll give my favorite props at available numbers before the stream for Washington, Detroit. Live in-game watch along. If there's some bets to fire during the game, we'll fire them. Whether that's side, total, props, be here tonight, 7:45 Eastern time for that watch along. Appreciate every single one of you guys tuning in today. And of course, one more reminder, smash that like button on the way out the door. If you're not subbed here and you enjoy the content, hit that subscribe button. And since we got another 4 hours till kickoffs, if you can share this out on your platforms, help us get a little bit more views. That would be very much appreciated as well. I'm Rob Pizzola. I'll catch you guys back here on Forward Progress later on tonight. Peace out, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.